This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by the patrons of Starwalker Studios. Learn how you can support the show at starwalkerstudios.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Lex Out Loud, world building for science fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. I'm working on my third novel, my first science fiction novel, and I'm taking you along with me for the ride. Well, welcome back, everyone. And once again, it occurs to me that it's about time to change that tagline. Haven't been talking so much about world building lately. So maybe next time for episode 25, I'll just grab the bull by the horns and call it the beginning of season 2. And we'll change that tagline. I'm thinking right now, I'm going to change it to characters and conflicts for science fiction, because that's where I'm going next. I'm going to be working more on characters and conflicts. Not that the world building is over, it's never over, but this preliminary world building is over. So we're moving on to the next phase in the project. So I guess it's time to change the tagline for the show accordingly. Really quickly, before we get into our topics today, I want to send a shout out and a thank you to Peter for your donation on the website over at starwalkerstudios.com/LexStarwalker.com. Thank you so much for your donation, Peter. I really, really appreciate it. Although now that I think about it, Peter indicated that his favorite podcast that I produce is Game Master's Journey. So maybe he's not listening to this one. I don't know. I mean, I assume that he is if he's giving a donation at this time. But maybe not. But I hope so that he can hear me say thank you. So thank you, Peter, very much. And if you'd like to donate, you can do so on the website over at lexstarwalker.com. Just hit that pretty pink donate button, and you can donate any amount you want. So again, thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it. So I thought a fun thing I could start doing on the show is talking a little bit about what I'm doing that's not specifically writing, but is maybe somewhat relevant, at least as far as filling the well, the creative well, so to speak. So, I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but I thought maybe every episode, maybe not, maybe just occasionally, but I could let you know what I'm reading, what I'm watching, and what I'm playing. Those are kind of the three things I thought of. If you think I should add something to that, let me know. So as far as what I'm reading right now, currently the novel I'm reading, I usually tend to only read one novel at a time. That's just how I am. Although I may read nonfiction alongside a novel, or may read multiple nonfiction books alongside a novel. I tend to only want to read one work of fiction at a time. So the novel I'm reading right now is called A Memory of Light, and that's by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. It is the 14th and final book of the Wheel of Time saga or series, whatever you want to call it. And it's fantasy mostly. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's science fantasy or sci-fi fantasy or anything like that. I mean, it's definitely a fantasy. It uses a lot of fantasy tropes, specifically tropes from The Lord of the Rings, which, I mean, kind of all fantasy did back when Eye of the World, the first book, came out. That's all fantasy was back then, was various versions of imitations of Tolkien. It seemed like we've come a ways since then, in some ways. But yes, it's the last book of the series. This one is written by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. The last 3 books were written by Brandon after Mr. Jordan passed away. But he, luckily for us, Robert Jordan left a lot of notes. His editor was also his wife. So he spoke with her and I think maybe some other people before he passed to put whoever took up the torch in as good a state as they could be to finish it. So that's why it says it's by both of them, because Brandon actually wrote, the book, but he was using Robert Jordan's notes. And my understanding is there are at least some scenes that had already written. One of the last scenes in the book, or maybe it is the last scene in the book, Brandon used pretty much as Robert Jordan wrote it. So yeah, it was a joint effort. But yeah, anybody who's listened to my podcast for very long probably knows that I'm a huge Wheel of Time fan. It's hands down my favorite fantasy series or book. And at this point in my life, it's the only fantasy I'm reading. And really, I don't have any intentions of reading any fantasy in the near future. I've had enough. But the Wheel of Time, I love it. And they're making it into a TV show. I would like to say I'm cautiously optimistic about the TV show, but to be completely honest, that would be going a bit too far. I have concerns, but I hope they do a good job with it. I'm definitely going to watch it and support it. I hope they do a good job, but I'm just extremely skeptical because the series is 14 books long. The books are massive. They're not small books. And I mean, there's just no way that a television show could ever really do the entire story justice. I think the only way they'll be able to do a good job is if they, from the beginning, decide to cut certain things out to shorten it. Because if they're just going to think that they're going to go and start at book one and then just go through the story and see how it goes, we probably won't even get halfway through the series before the show gets canceled. And I think that would be even a worse ending than Game of Thrones was. I mean, there are people that think the Game of Thrones ending was okay or was even good. My wife actually was fine with it. I tend to think it was horrible. In fact, I think the whole last season was pretty bad. But this would be far worse because at least Game of Thrones ended the story. Maybe not in a satisfying way for some of us, but they at least ended the story where, if they get a third or a quarter of the way through these books and then, Amazon pulls the plug on the show, it's just going to end in the middle of nowhere. And this is the kind of story where you can't cheat the ending. I mean, the ending is telegraphed from the very first book. So you can't fake out the audience and end it sooner than that. So I don't know. I haven't seen any statements by anyone working on the show as to what they're cutting out or how they're addressing the length. I haven't even seen an acknowledgement of how many episodes there are per season. So yeah, and the fact that even though they've been asked questions about this numerous times, the fact that no one will give a straight answer as to what they're cutting out or what their strategy is to get to a satisfying ending before the show is canceled, that concerns me even more. Because I have a feeling if they had an answer that they thought people would like, they would give that answer, and the silence is deafening on the topic, you could say. So yeah, I'm highly skeptical, and the last thing I want is to get invested in something else that is going to either not be finished or not be finished in a good way. So we'll see. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully somehow they beat all the odds and they can actually end it somehow in a satisfying way before it gets canceled. So yeah, that's what I'm reading. I'm also reading The Elements of Style, 4th edition by William Strunk and E.B. White, which is a grammar book. It was actually recommended by Stephen King in his book on writing. And I remember when I just recently listened to that book again, realizing that I had never gotten or read that book, even though when I listened to On Writing for the first time years ago, over a decade ago, I fully intended to do so. So I got that, and I haven't read it all yet. It's a pretty small book, but it's a grammar book, so you don't want it to be very big. I've already found a couple things in it that I think are maybe a little outdated or just not really the way things are done anymore. But I've also learned quite a few things that I didn't know, or just better ways to do things. So yeah, that's been really interesting. As far as what I'm watching, I'm actually not watching anything right now. I'm kind of in this wasteland of TV right now. There's just nothing. I'm not going to say there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there that I want to watch right now. We just finished The Queen's Gambit. We were a little late on that. But we finally got around to watching that. It was fine. I'm honestly a little mystified why there was so much talk about it. It seemed for a minute there, it was very popular and everybody was talking about it. And after seeing it, I mean, like I said, it was fine, but not particularly noteworthy in any way I could see. So I'm not sure why it made such an impact, what people like so much about it, but it was fine. It was something to watch. I recently watched the movie Stowaway, which is a movie on Netflix, I think produced by Netflix, which is something I've been wanting to see since it came out, and I finally got a chance to see it. And I would classify it as hard sci-fi, but it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and it illustrated very well some concepts that I've talked about quite a bit on the show. It illustrated how rotational gravity works, and even showed how, as you move towards the center of rotation, how gravity will diminish until at the very middle there is no artificial gravity. So that was super cool. Showed an Aldrin cycler in action. That was super cool. I've actually considered, toss around the idea of doing some kind of commentary for this show, just because I watched it with my wife, and I talk with my wife about a lot of this stuff that I talk on the show about. So she's definitely better versed in sci-fi type things than just your average person who's not super into sci-fi would be. But there were still numerous things in the show that she didn't really understand, or she didn't really catch the significance of. So I imagine that's true for a lot of people, that there were just things that people didn't realize why certain things happened the way they did, or what exactly was going on. Personally, with a caveat, I think the movie did a really good job of walking that line of explaining what needed to be explained while not explaining too much. And that can be a real danger with anything getting anywhere close to hard science fiction, is you can explain things way too much for people and you lose people. Personally, I think they made, for the most part, the right choices and didn't explain things in exhaustive detail to keep the pace up and to keep it from getting too pedagogic or too just lumbering in pace. But at the same time, I said with a caveat, and my caveat is I think that the movie was made for science fiction fans, or hard science fiction fans. So if you're a hard science fiction fan, or you're someone who knows about space exploration and orbital mechanics and things like that, then you're going to completely understand everything that's going on, and it'll be great. If you're someone who doesn't know about those things, I think you could still enjoy the movie, but there will be details and certain things happening that you may not be clear on why that happened or what exactly is going on. And, that's a decision they had to make. And you can't make a movie or a book or whatever it is. You can't make it for everybody. You can't make a movie that everybody's going to like. So you have to choose your audience and make it for that audience. And I think they did a really good job of choosing the right audience, because let's face it, those are the people that are going to like the movie, are people who are into science fiction, who are into space exploration and science and things like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's a really smart and I think brave move to make the movie for those people, and not not try to explain it for someone who's not at all interested or educated on those things, because that person probably wouldn't like the movie anyway. So yeah, but I thought about maybe doing a commentary because there are some things that I thought were really cool in the movie that they didn't really shine a lantern on necessarily or even explain, but it was there if you knew what was going on. That was really cool. So I don't know. I thought it might be cool to point some of those things out, but that would take a lot of time. And honestly, probably there's an official commentary out there. If nothing else, if you get the Blu-ray or whatever, there's probably commentary from the people that actually made the movie, and hopefully they would touch on those things. But yeah, that's it. Not watching anything else right now. Now there's stuff out there that I'm just choosing not to watch. I am Star Wars'd out, at least the Disney version of Star Wars. I've had more than my fill. I have no interest in it. I might check out the Ahsoka show if or when that ever comes out. But yeah, The Mandalorian was another show that everybody else seemed to be far more impressed with than I was. I mean, it was fine. It was okay. But it was, I don't know. I'm not in a hurry to watch the next season of that either, to be honest. And yeah, I've never been a huge Marvel fan, but I'm definitely Marveled out now. Although I may check out the Loki show just because I have seen quite a few people whose opinions I respect say they liked it. So, of course, I don't know how much of Marvel fanboys there are. There are a lot of people who just will like anything with Marvel on it. But so maybe I'll try that just because I don't have anything else to watch right now. But yeah, waiting for something good to watch. There are a lot of shows that I dig that have new seasons coming sometime, but this pandemic has just really kind of screwed everything up. And then as far as what I'm playing, currently I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2. I play on PS4, and I've been playing some Magic the Gathering. Took a few years off of playing that game, but during the quarantine started playing it a bit again. Play some Commander with my wife, and then I play their sort of terrible arena PC game for Magic. I play Brawl on there. That's really the only thing on there I like for various reasons. But yeah, if you play on Arena and you're in the Discord, let me know, and maybe we can play together sometime, especially if you do Brawl. I enjoy doing the Brawl on there. So yeah, that's what I've been doing as far as that kind of stuff. So just to kind of go back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, I have finished my preliminary world building for this novel. And now that I'm working on the actual novel, I'm going to be giving less details about the novel itself on this show, at least for the time being, until I finish the first draft, which I've talked about on the show before. Also, from now on, at least for now, I'm going to try to keep the runtime of this around 30 minutes. And I'd also like to keep releasing as regularly as possible. I'd love to release an episode every week. So I decided what I would start to do now, because I consider just taking a break from the podcast while I do the first draft, but I don't really want to do that unless I have to. If I can come up with things to talk about that are somewhat relevant and keep things going, I'd rather do that. So I thought what I would do is I'm going to start collecting what I like to call micro topics. I've done this on other podcasts before, which are topics that I can discuss in just a few minutes that don't need a whole episode. And I think I should be able to cover one or two of those, or possibly three per episode. And then, so I'm just going to start collecting those as I think of them. And then once I have enough for an episode, I'll record an episode. And then, I can also give some periodic updates on my progress with the book and kind of where I'm at. Although I probably won't do that every single episode. So yeah, if you have any suggestions or ideas for topics or micro topics, sorry, as I drop my notes, let me know if you have any ideas what I could talk about. All right. So yeah, going to try and keep this from going too long today. I think this is going to be the last episode for season 2. Again, the seasons are super arbitrary. I didn't want them to be, I wanted actually the seasons to be years, just do a year's worth of episodes and call it a season. But yeah, I decided to make the first season about world building. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to spend a year world building. So yeah, I changed the domain on the website. Well, I didn't change it. I added a domain. So yeah, it seems like a good time to start a new season so I can start using the new domain, which is like starwalker.com. The old one still works. They both work. And yeah, I'm going to be talking less about world building and more about other things for the next little while. So I felt like that subtitle was getting a little misleading. So yeah, that's why. But other than that, not really much is going to change. I was hoping to get some new album art for the show. I asked my wife to come up with something for me, but I don't think she's gotten anywhere on that yet. So maybe that'll have to wait for season 3, or I'll just, whenever she does it, I'll just start using it in the middle of whatever season it is. So yeah, to round out things today, I thought what I could talk about is just to try to get more of you to come join us in the Discord is to remind you or tell you that as I find interesting news that is relevant to what I talk about on this show, I will share it in the Discord. And one of the people in the Discord recently commented on how all of a sudden there's been a lot of this news in the last, I don't know, few days, week or so. And there's just a lot going on right now that's really exciting. So I thought really quickly I would just rattle off some of the news stories I've shared on the Discord. I'll put links to these stories in the show notes over at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. But I really hope you go join the Discord and join us there. But yeah, if you want to know more about these, you can either go to the Discord and find the link there in our chat, or you can go to the website in the show notes and get the link. So there's an article about NASA's Curiosity rover captured stunning pictures of clouds on Mars. This has been a couple weeks now, I think, that this was in the news. And so they came up with this, composite image where they put together, I forget how many different images it was. It was a lot to make this huge image of the sky on Mars from the surface, from the view of the surface, with these shimmering clouds. And it's gorgeous. You should check it out. Have an article on Axiom signs a deal with SpaceX to deliver a crew to the International Space Station. Got an article on NASA announces two new missions to Venus. 2 new visions to Venus, I think is what I was going to say there. So yeah, we're sending 2 robotic missions to Venus, which is pretty exciting. I think it's been since like the 70s or something since we've sent anything to Venus. So that's pretty awesome. Got an article on researchers continuing to refine the production of graphene, which we talked about a lot on this show. Relativity Space has announced a new reusable medium lift launch vehicle rocket that they're building. Gorgeous concept art for that. Really sexy looking rocket. Ultra high density hard drives are being made with graphene that have 10 times the storage capacity. So, I mean, that's really exciting for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's just always nice to have better hard drives on our computers. But what makes me really excited about it is the more of these uses for graphene that we find, the more of these everyday technology uses that we find, just the better it is for the technology, the more money and research and development is going to go into graphene production. And yeah, that's better for all these awesome things we want to do in space one day. And then finally, there's an article on a study that was done on artificial gravity on the ISS, which is a pretty interesting read. I might have to go track down that paper that they talk about, although I'm not sure. It might be in Japanese, because I'm pretty sure if I remember from the article, the researchers were Japanese. So I wonder if that paper is in Japanese. I can't read Japanese. Maybe I can find an English translation, but it might be in English. The paper might be in English. I'm not sure. But anyway, they did some research using mice on the space station to see whether artificial gravity reduces the muscular atrophy that you suffer from in microgravity. And spoiler, it does, as predicted. So that's super cool. And yeah, that's a pretty cool article and a pretty cool study. And basically what they did was they had 2 groups of mice on the space station, and one of them they had in a centrifuge to simulate Earth gravity. And the actual goal of the research wasn't originally to test artificial gravity. It was to look at the muscular atrophy, but they realized, anytime you do an experiment, you need a good control group. And, previously for studies like this, the control group would be mice here on Earth in a lab somewhere. And well, that's not really a good control group because the mice on the space station were launched into orbit and went through all these things that the mice on Earth didn't. So it's not a like to like comparison. So they needed a better control group. And so they came up with this idea of having the control group mice on the space station as well, but to use a centrifuge to simulate 1G of Earth gravity. And due to that, it also became a good experiment to look at, does artificial gravity actually help reduce that muscle loss? And they found that it did. So pretty awesome for the future of artificial gravity using rotation, which is what my habitats in my novel are going to do. So pretty exciting stuff. All right. So one other thing I want to talk about today, another quick little micro topic today. I want to talk a little bit again about word counts. A little while ago, I don't remember exactly which episode it was off the top of my head, but I rattled out some numbers for the word counts for a short story, a novelette, a novella, and a novel. And those came from SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, and just kind of ended up indirectly talking about that on Twitter today with Ty Frank, who is half of James S.A. Corey, who are the authors that wrote The Expanse. And I just mentioned the 40,000 word novel length. And it just basically led to a little bit of a Twitter discussion about, how long is a novel? And John Scalzi posted in there in this discussion. I'm using the term discussion very lightly here because we're talking about Twitter. But he posted something I found really interesting. So I thought I would share it with you. And I'm just going to quote him. This is what he wrote on Twitter. He says 40,000, which is what CIFRA says is the minimum for a novel. So a novel is more than 40,000 words is what they say. And this comes from their guidelines for the Nebula Awards. So John Scalzi says 40,000 is an artifact of the definitions being defined during the, quote, supermarket rack era, when novels were much, much shorter. These days, from a practical point of view, publishers want novels of 60,000 words at least. And most genres have a preferred minimum length. For example, science fiction or fantasy, the preferred minimum length is 75,000 words. So I just wanted to share that with you because that's not what I told you. I just gave you the numbers that SFWA had. But at least according to John Scalzi, and he certainly knows more about it than I do, those numbers are a bit outdated and come from kind of a different era when there was much more concern about, I'm assuming from what he's saying here, when there was much more concern about how much physical space a book takes up on a shelf. So I'm thinking what's going on here is these days with the rising popularity in both ebooks and audiobooks compared to back then, that those concerns, although probably still somewhat relevant, are not as important as they were back then. Because when it comes to an ebook, it doesn't really matter how many words there are. Now, an audiobook, I'm sure length is a concern because that goes into your production costs. The longer the book is, the more hours it's going to take to produce an audiobook, the more it's going to cost. But at least with ebooks, it's not such a big thing. And kind of what I'm talking about here is this idea, and like I said, this used to be, I think, more of a big deal than it is now, but where publishers didn't so much like huge, thick books like your huge epic fantasies because they take so much room, so much space on a physical bookshelf. So you think about a book like one of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive books, Compare that with a more modestly sized book, and you might be able to fit 3 copies of another book on the amount of shelf space that 1 copy of the Stormlight Archive book would take. So it's a harder sell to the bookstore to sell them this huge book that's going to take up a bunch of space on their shelf that they could have filled with 3 books. At least that was the wisdom back in the day. But like I said, things are changing all the time. And at least from what John Scalzi said here, it sounds like that's not so much the case anymore, to where, they're wanting those shorter novels. But yeah, he makes a really important point, which is the point I want to reiterate here, is that this does vary a bit by genre, probably varies even by publisher, by editor, by agent. So, if you're writing a novel and you're wondering, kind of where do I want to be at as far as word count, I would look into the specific genre that you're writing. For example, YA is going to have a different minimum word count than epic fantasy, which may be different than urban fantasy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really depends on the genre that you're writing in. And it also just depends on your agent, your editor, your publisher, what they want, what they're telling you. So ultimately, of course, I hope this is obvious, but if it's not, ultimately you want to go with what your agent / editor / publisher is telling you. Not, don't go by what I say or what some other blowhard on a podcast says. Go with what they tell you. But yeah, so take those numbers I gave you before with a huge grain of salt. John Scalzi's saying that probably 60,000 words is a better minimum for a novel in general. And if you're talking about science fiction or fantasy specifically, then 75,000 words is probably a better minimum word count target for a novel. 40,000 is really low. Yeah, it's kind of funny. Someone on Twitter made the point that even NaNoWriMo targets 50,000 words, but I kind of feel like that's apples and oranges because that's a first draft. And yeah, usually you're going to cut a lot out of your first draft. So your first draft will tend to be longer than the finished book. I think it was Stephen King said ballpark, he usually tries to cut 10% out of the first draft. So yeah, saying NaNoWriMo targets 50,000 words doesn't really mean that that's what a novel should be. That means that's what a NaNoWriMo first draft of a novel should be. So, if you took a 50,000 word NaNoWriMo novel and then cut 10% out, you'd be down to 45,000 words. So, and that's, assuming it wouldn't require more extensive editing than that, which, I've never done NaNoWriMo, but I assume, and I could be wrong because this is an assumption, but I assume that a NaNoWriMo book requires a lot more editing than a non-NaNoWriMo book written by the same author. Because the whole point of NaNoWriMo is just to crank out 50,000 words in a month. So you're going for quantity, not, there's not much time for editing or anything like that if you're going to write 50,000 words in a month. So, there may be some writers out there who tend to do more of that kind of editing in the first draft or write a cleaner first draft. Like I tend to where if I were to try to write a NaNoWriMo book, it would be a mess compared to what my first drafts normally look like. So, it would take a lot more editing. So I might end up cutting a lot more than 10% or might end up adding a lot to it because there's just not enough there or whatever. So yeah, I don't think that's a good comparison at all. But I thought it was kind of interesting to think about, like that would be an interesting topic to get into if you could get numbers from a bunch of authors. What was the word count of your first draft of a novel versus the final draft? That'd be really cool if you could get enough data from enough writers that you could see like a statistical breakdown and see, what percentage of writers end up with a final draft that's longer than the first draft and by what percentage, how much longer is it versus what percentage of writers end up with a final draft that's shorter, and then how shorter is it? That would be really interesting. And I would guess that it'd be all over the place. You'd have, people on both sides, but maybe there would be a, one that's more prevalent. I don't know. That'd be really interesting to see. So yeah, definitely go by your specific genre and go by, if you have an agent or an editor, go by what they tell you when it comes to word counts. But, if you're looking for some general numbers, there you go. And yeah, I'm sure he's never going to listen to this, but if he does, thank you, John Scalzi, for that. I thanked him on Twitter. That's really good to know, and always good to hear from someone that knows more what they're talking about than what I do. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me today. If you would like to reach me, you can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker, and you can call my voicemail 951-465-5391. Please join our community on Discord and hang out with us there. Really enjoy everyone who participates in the Discord. We have a lot of nice discussions in there. Thank you for everyone who participates. And if you'd like to see the show notes, you can find those at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. So thank you very much for your time and attention today. And let me know if you have any ideas for some micro topics or things you'd like to hear about on future episodes. And, if it's world building related, that's fine. I'm not putting a moratorium on world building discussions. It's just going to be less the focus going forward, but I'm sure we'll return to it again and again. So if you have something world building related, that's great. All right. So I will be back soon with another episode. And until then, keep writing.